To be sure. Feedback. A lot of noise here. Hold on. Okay, if we can be sure of one thing in the UX world, it's that change and learning and reinventing ourselves will be constant in our lives. One of the big recent shifts in UX designers' lives and lately is the need to develop for mobile applications, and in addition to your bag of tricks in web design. So today, Adam Polansky will talk about his journey through this change. For more than 30 years, Adam Polansky has been closing the gap between ideas and reality in a career that began in advertising design with a few sharp turns along the way. His efforts contributed to successful projects across several industries for companies like Travelocity, Dr. Pepper, Radio City Entertainment, Texas Instruments, and American Express. He's an established leader in the UX community through organizations like UXPA, the Information Architecture Institute, the IA Summit, and Big V Design events. A decided and dedicated storyteller, lecturer, and author, he speaks regularly at conferences, schools, and workshops. His published work includes articles for the Journal of the American Society for Information Science and Technology, Boxes and Arrows, the Society for Technical Communication, and his book, User Experience Success Stories, How Organizations Improve by Making Easier to Use Software and Websites, is among his contributions. So now I'll turn it over to Adam.
How you doing? Can everybody hear me and see this okay?
I hear you fine.
Y'all able to see the presentation? Do I need to do something to share on my side?
Yeah, there's a share application on the, should be on your screen.
Speak now. Got that part down. Let's see, I'll share my desktop.
There we go.
Okay.
There it is.
Up and running?
Yep.
Great. Well, thanks for having me. This is something that I was pretty excited to help get started, and hopefully the beginning of a longer involvement with the UXD program at Kent State. And you know, what we're talking about today is something that I've recently gone through, and like a lot of the sort of better things that have happened in my life, I sort of moved into it sideways without actually planning on it. Back in July of 2012, I was in a conversation with the UX director, who's a colleague of mine at a company called Bottle Rocket. And these guys were famous for two things. They have really rich experience in developing native mobile apps, not optimized web, but specifically for touchscreens and design for you know, iPhones, iPads, Android, and tablets. And it's also run by the biggest Apple fanboy on the planet. And they had a real devotion to Apple. And at that time, I had neither. So I was kind of surprised when my boss came to me, and we spent a little bit of time sort of with me trying to explain why I probably wasn't the guy he was looking for, and him telling me that, yeah, they understood all of that and that was okay, that they still really had a need for some of the things that I did. That, and I didn't haggle over compensation, so that might help. Anyway, I wasn't remotely coy about wanting to be involved in this. I had been at Travelocity for some years, and it had been all web all the time. We had begun to do a little bit of mobile work, and that mostly, as a director, for me, that mostly involved looking over somebody else's shoulder and saying, hey, you know, I'd move that over a little bit. So nothing really practical. I mean, I've read the books, even the guys who wrote the books, but it was all theory. There was really nothing to bring to bear there. So it was one of the fastest rounds of interviews I've ever had. And in this last year, I had the opportunity to bring something to the table, you know, to get involved in one of the hottest areas of digital design with people who've helped define it. This company went into business the day after the App Store was open. That's how sure our founder was that this was going to be something we really wanted to do. So after years of web development, I got behind a couple screens here because I love the sound of my own voice. So after some years of web development, traveling, entertainment, and spoken a lot publicly about usability testing, content qualification, information architecture basics, I learned pretty quickly that we'd kind of been relying on a lot of the same rules for a long time. And as I began working on apps, I learned that some of these things I was going to have to abandon. I had to be ready to let go of these cherished ideas. So as I said in the abstract, there was some bad news there, but there was also some good news. A lot of the basics do still apply. And what I also discovered is that because, for a number of reasons, usability is more important, I think, now, and more difficult to sideline than it ever has been in this space. So for everybody who's listening to this, I think this particular presentation may be getting near the end of its shelf life, because I think that as I've roamed around, most of the folks that are out there have at least gotten their feet wet in some form of mobile app design, and I hope that's true with this group, because I'll put this presentation on mothballs and start talking about something else that's pretty cool. So the first thing that I noticed, I mean day one, was that speed was important. And that came to bear when I heard a guy talking about something in the morning, and by the afternoon he had a working prototype, and I started thinking, man, I'm really going to have to kick the rust off. So let's see. So that was my first clue that things needed to change. Shortly after I joined the company, and after this little episode, I was told that the strategy group was making a trip to Cupertino to a well-known hardware and software developer that's out there, whose name I can't say. But there I was with my brand new Samsung phone and my brand new Android tablet, and I felt like I was a Jew going to the Vatican. So it was an interesting conversation going out there, and at one time being told, do not get your phone out. Don't let them see it. And so all of those nerves built up, and here I am at this fabled place, listening to the guys who get to make the decisions, a couple of them anyway, who make the decision about what good design means, at least from their point of view. And I came away discovering a couple of things, or coming to a couple of realizations. One is that I found something I'd always been craving, and that is that Apple protects design. And I think anybody who's been in the space for a little bit of time knows what I'm talking about. It's very difficult in projects to keep design and keep quality in the forefront when the pain that comes from time and money are making themselves felt. And so oftentimes we find ourselves kind of sitting on the curb with our toys and muttering to ourselves about these bastards we don't get it. So one of the things I found is that design needs protection. It's something that kind of has a tough time standing up on its own. And these guys were actively protecting it, which is why they've been able to do so many of the things that they have. Their expectations for apps are famously high, and sometimes it's hard to know what's going to pass muster. It's a little, getting an app launch in the App Store is a little like trying to get past the bouncer at a popular nightclub who's going to look you up and down and decide if you look good enough to get in. But they put their stake in quality, and that results in the pretty verified baseline and the polished apps to the App Store. So before I make it sound like this is a religious conversion, it's not. But what I also learned is brought the Google Play Store into perspective. It's a little more democratized, lower barrier to entry. You find hundreds of apps out there with the same function, and that arguably kind of leaves some room for innovation. So that includes failure, and it's more like the Wild West. The signal-to-noise ratio out there is kind of high. It's tough to manage, and so while you don't entirely try to predict or define good, a lot of work goes into their platform as well. And if you want your apps featured in their store, you need to recognize that too. It's not an accident that many of the best apps gain popularity on the App Store first. And so what I'm going to go through a list of perspectives, 7 in this way, that I knew had to change in order to be successful with this group. So the web and mobile contrast, one of the first things I mentioned, of course, was speed. Good focused apps are often smaller from an IA perspective. You've got fewer screens, shorter distance between start to finish in projects. So all this contributes to the need for everyone to quickly understand the ideas and how they'll play out. And this is just as true for the web, but it doesn't always seem to work that way. Out their phone. This particular attachment means that people take it really personally when apps don't work well. You know, I paid 99 cents. This is mine. It bloody well better work. So it's funny when it's on your device, you get this hyper awareness of dead weight, and when you find it, you frown on it. And websites, you know, don't belong to you, but people seem to feel about their apps that their apps do belong to them. Another contrast is physicality, location. Oh, wait a minute, I missed something here. So as far as location goes, who hasn't gotten up, started toward the restroom, and you make it about 5 feet away before you double back and go to pick up the phone? So arriving and setting it down as quietly as possible in the toilet paper dispenser. You don't want to be obvious to anyone else who might be in there doing their business. Of course, they probably aren't paying attention because, well, there's a statistically good chance that they're using their phone. Some statistics I ran across for US connected devices is situational usage. And number one on the list is audio watching TV, and that's for the tablet, 70%, for e-readers, 35%, and smartphones, 68%. Lying in bed, which could be happening at the same time as watching TV, at around 57% for the tablets and 51% for smartphones. With friends and family, 44% for the tablet, 58% for the smartphone, waiting for something. You know, if you, like me, and you're past 40, the warranty is out, so you spend a lot of time with doctors waiting rooms for various things. So I know I get a lot of use in there in the reading time. And then number 5 is in the bathroom, 25% for the tablet, 28% for the smartphone. So there's a 1 in 4 chance that anybody who's in there is on the phone. When did that used to happen? Let's see, I'm getting out of sync with my slides here. So as for physicality, aside from where people use their app, you can't design an app for humans without taking into consideration the circumstances of its use. With a website, you've got screen, keyboard, human being, and that all interactive is all happening with a pretty close environment. But now you've got devices that are maybe in one hand, maybe in 2 hands, maybe very small, maybe a little bit bigger, and now we've got sub-8 tablets. So these controls need to be considered with them in place. So to paraphrase Lou Polansky, 2 hands, 1 finger, 1 eye. So the tasks you're designing, given to quick reference, task completion without a lot of data needed to make a decision. So think about restaurant reservations, adding a hotel night if you're staying in a hotel, adding 1 more night, finding directions. Those are some good examples of tasks that you're designing suited to a user who's sitting down with an app and looking through lots of content. On the other hand, those things like shopping, planning, drawing, and writing are usually done on the fly, whereas those other things tend to happen pretty quickly. So they also suggest the physical position of the user. So as I said before, sitting up in front of a laptop, whether it's literally in your lap or on a table, is still a pretty limited dynamic. Are they more likely to be standing, single-handed, seated, maybe at a desk or a tabletop, maybe using 2 hands, maybe using 1, while they control the index, while they control their app with the index finger or both thumbs. So you got to work through these equations. This is where persona becomes pretty important, because your persona also need to include the physicality of use. How did this all get out of order? I've just shot through this. I need to back up. So awareness. Basically, what we're talking about here is sensors. So you know these devices are loaded with lots of ways that your phone is going to interact with you as opposed to you interacting with it. It knows things about where you're standing, about what the weather's like, your proximity to your favorite shops or your favorite kind of food or friends, and I'll leave that as a loose definition. What those people and others think about the things around you. what's the proximity and orientation of the device to the world? So again, as you're thinking through your persona and thinking through the things you want an app to do, in the web you think about a screen and another screen and another screen, and maybe a use case or two that exists within that screen. Here you also need to think about the device itself and what are those sensors telling you? What can you draw into the experience that you're developing to make it a little bit more aware of the world around you? So the interactions themselves, so when you're using a laptop or a desktop and you've got the stationary position and you're using a mouse slider, you can pinpoint really, really granular places on the screen. But with mobile devices, you got less space to work in, and you've got to devote more space to those controls where they exist. So the constraints of real estate force designers and stakeholders to make choices about the layout. Again, quoting Luke Polansky here, espouses his mobile approach. So we're following a forced discipline on mobile devices due to the real estate available. So these are things, again, we always should have found on the web, but for some reason, because we can scroll left and right infinitely, we tend to not do that. Whereas these devices, because of the real estate, kind of force that on us. So by extension, this forced discipline results also in both markets and stand out in their markets. And among people like us who look for and appreciate that sort of thing. And as I said, you have this ability to zero in on a pixel level at a pixel level with a screen and a mouse pointer, but this is your pointer when you're using a device, and so you've just lost some real estate, and you've got to figure out how to adopt for that. So the next thing we'll talk about is focus. One of my coworkers here is a guy by the name of James Collins. He's another strategist here. He made a comment about the discovery sessions that we have. Anything like that. And these are conversations you really have to have, because one of the things, a catchphrase around here is embracing the impossible. We want to do things that haven't been done before. We want to take advantage of all these capabilities and this understanding of what people do with their devices and create something that may create a whole new behavior, a whole new level of interest or delight. So this is the time to identify those things. But at some point you have to identify the content stream should actually have, because that is your app. And you have to know if those are going to satisfy your goal set. This is where app development is different from web, again, in that, when you want to have an interaction, you often can develop an interaction and develop the business rules within the design. With apps, it's all feeds. You're as good as the feeds that you get, so making sure that you're set, verified, whatever data is going to be coming into your application, you need to know that, because at the end of the day, that's what you're going to build to. So websites can and do have these deep hierarchical structures, and they have multiple contexts, because usually what happens in a company is the site needs to reflect the majority of a corporate business plan or the navigation structure and that hierarchy of a library of content, especially if it's not revenue generating, like an e-tail site. And ironically, the rules and the trade-offs you make for an app should be the guiding principles for web design. But when you look at these large branded websites, as Steve Krug points out, you're looking at their org chart, more accurately, a picture of the political landscape. Because what finds its way into that all-important homepage is parsed along territorial lines. Whatever has the most emphasis on the screen, is a reflection of spikes in the executive power grid. So apps, on the other hand, perform best when they're focused. So if anybody's ever had a chance, and if you haven't, you should go look at the Apple Human Interface Guidelines or Android's User Interface Guidelines. You're going to get some of the same stuff there because it makes sense, and it's about getting down to one thing, finding one thing that the app can do really well. Some of the best apps, if you look at your phone, have only one thing that they do. If anybody's ever used the bubble level, like for construction, for leveling off pictures, or if you're cutting, if you like to do any woodworking, or just making sure that anything is straight and level, there's an app for that, and that's all it does, and it does that extremely well. Whereas if you were to try to put 25 different tools in there, it just wouldn't be served as well inside these devices. So when we talk about focus, you see the popularity of these successful apps. Read the reviews. It's hard to argue against that point. Here we go. So context and content, and this is just a sort of an extension of the focus conversation. This is probably the hardest thing that I've found to do with clients, is to get them to begin, first of all, with the context of what it is they want their app to do, and then narrow that down to the specific content. There's this seems to be this burning desire where we have a website, and so we want a tablet app. We want the tablet app to do everything the website does. And then we want to have a phone version of it too. And of course, we want the phone to do everything that the tablet and website do. And that's just not always going to be practical. And so the biggest difference I found here was how much rigor has to go into helping clients be able to see the forest for the trees, or be able to identify a tree within that forest. So I mentioned before that usability is more important now. These apps are built quickly. And with reviews, you get a feedback mechanism right away. It's available to anybody who installs your app. And the number of installs kind of as well. And so, as they say, you only get one chance to make a first impression. If your app doesn't provide something unique or more efficient than anyone else to the users, they're going to drop you like a bad habit. So, again, this sort of is an aggregate point for the things I've been talking about. Or you can walk through this understanding of how people think about their devices, how they actually physically use their devices, what capabilities are available to those devices. Then it becomes a conversation to have with your client. So look, given all these things that we can do, it seems like an awful lot of different stuff. We still need, in order for the app to be useful in people's minds, we still have to really be clear about what it does. And the best way you're going to do that is through some form of usability testing. So at best, you're going to hedge your bets as you validate the focus of your app. Your testing doesn't have to consist of a large-scale formal environment. In fact, it's better if it doesn't, because these apps are used in the wild. They're used in coffee shops. They're used in doctors' waiting rooms. They're used in the best. So coming up with some testing methods that are maybe a little more quick and dirty if you use the formal testing environment are things that are going to give you some insight pretty quickly. And the quicker you can get them, the quicker you can make the course corrections in development. So based on these examples that we were talking about, maybe you can see how important this is. The loop between launching an app and feedback mechanism of reviews means that you want to get it right or you're going to be ignored. So the good news is speed and the ability to fix things quickly means you don't have to get it perfect. And this is another thing I think that happens is we're very used to hearing, well, we'll get that phase 2 when we're talking about websites. Phase 2 doesn't come along very often, especially in large companies. But in apps, phase 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, they come along because in order to keep these things relevant, keep them working well in the stores, and keep people downloading them, you need to make sure that you're always addressing the things that come up with they're out there. So, so I'm kind of staying out of the process discussion because you can be caught up in semantics. But let's just say that you're doing yourself a disservice if you don't factor the testing into your development. So let's talk about a few ways to put UX to work. When I was first putting this presentation together, I started thinking, what are the attributes of testing when you're choosing your methods? What do you need to be able to say about them for them to be good candidates for the testing that you want to do? And I came up with these, and they have to be simple. They can't take a lot of time or a lot of setup, because as they said, these projects move fast, and you need to be able to incorporate what you've learned just as quickly. They need to be practical. If you've done a good job zeroing in on the one thing you want your app to do and do well, make sure that whatever you're testing speaks to that in terms of practicality. They've got to be actionable. So not only carry out the testing, but also be able to take action on the things that you observe when you do the testing. And you got to be able to get quick results. And there are some capabilities, there are some applications out there where you can start to get information back within an hour or two. Anyway, as I was looking at this, I saw this acronym, and I thought, yeah, that's what everybody uses, another acronym. But SPAC was just fun to say. There's just something sort of annoying and defiant about it all at once. Just saying SPAC out loud made me laugh, and so I stuck it. So I just kept it in there. But I mentioned speed a lot, and so I just ran with this one. We'll go into some different methods here. So the first is a competitive audit. So competitive audits aren't just necessarily going out and looking at applications that other people have done that are just like yours, or people who are just in the same competitive space as you all. These may not be direct competitors, but other people may have features, they may have capabilities in common. So examples would be something like a travel app and a movie app, both use reviews and ratings. A retail app and a news app both use cataloging to organize content. Games use leaderboards, and so do social apps. So who's doing something that satisfies a similar goal to your effort? Better yet, what goals aren't being met at all? In which case, does that present an opening for you? So comparing and contrasting user spreadsheets or flowcharts may set the course for app development. And that sounds like, oh my God, spreadsheet. But keep in mind that you're oftentimes dealing with people whose world makes sense in spreadsheets. And so when you're trying to have that conversation, get down to that one thing and get away from just sort of regurgitating something from the web into a tablet or something. These are some things that will catch people's attention early on that are kind of useful based on the audience that you have. You want to be a usability expert to your stakeholders as well. So the next thing is heuristic analysis. And this is something I hope most of you have heard of or even done on occasion. And if you've never done it, it's essentially a subjective review using generally accepted criteria. So most of you have probably seen or heard of Jacob Nielsen's 10 usability heuristics, and those have been updated and revised. And I've taken on a level of hubris myself, and I've come up with a set that I've centralized for mobile. And they're actually attached to this deck. So I'm not going to go through those here, but when you're done and we post the deck, you'll be able to take advantage of that if you'd like. And I've got a great big draft over them because I still am waiting to talk to some people who've had a chance to use them and see whether or not it helped. So you can either do it yourself or you can get a few people to review an app, but basically you're going against a set of rules to review this app and you're rating it in this scale, on a 1 to 5 scale, on how easy or how much it meets or doesn't meet those heuristics, those guidelines. So I found some examples, found some new considerations that I thought were more specific to apps, and they're still largely intact based on after I got through with them. But given the different dynamics between touch screens, keyboard, and mouse scenarios, I added a couple of things that take physicality and data feeds into account. But this is a great way, again, to get a sort of a review of an application as it exists, or of a website, or of a competitor's app, or something like that. Come back and say, here's who's doing it well, here's who's not, or here's what we're doing well, or here's what we're not doing well. It also kind of removes the voice from you saying, here's what I think, just because I'm really smart and you ought to listen to me, to saying, look, here's a generally accepted set of guidelines that the industry at large tends to move by. And this is what I'm holding this up against. So there is some value sometimes in moving the voice of authority away from yourself and onto someone else, because everybody knows that a consultant and an expert is somebody who comes from more than 50 miles away. So remote usability testing is something that I used to get a lot of use of in the web. And remote user testing and the next thing I'm going to talk about fall under what Russ Unger calls guerrilla user testing. We've done quite a bit of writing on that subject, but it's a way to observe user behavior and get feedback that have material impact on the app design without the kind of logistical or staging requirements that you need for more traditional or formal testing. So these are simpler, shorter tests. Sites like usertesting.com, Optimal Workshops, they offer some free demos, and I've got a list of resources also at the back of this deck. So those will be available to you too as you're trying to do a little research as to what tools you might use. But they offer free demos, and you can get a quick taste And you could actually test something in production just to see what kind of mileage you get with it. But you can get observations and immediate implications on what you're designing. So sites that offer a pool of pre-recruited testers, you almost have to rule out the novice use in this case. However, when you've got a smaller sample, you're not getting this down to the final decimal point, but what you are getting is an indication. You're seeing a pattern develop that tells you, we need to take a closer look at that. And again, as these projects move pretty quick, a lot of times that's really all you need to be able to make a course correction. And if these people are not necessarily novice users and they're still stumbling over it, that kind of adds to the severity, adds to the veracity of what you're observing. So the best thing about it's true of all usability testing, nothing gets stakeholder attention like human beings in the wild who are struggling or succeeding with their app. So this goes back again to what I was saying about the advantage of moving the voice of expertise out to the people who are using the app. I mean, you can stand on the mountaintop and preach your ass off about the train wreck you see coming, or you can get out and you can run this by about 10 people and come back and say, you know what, 7 people had trouble with it. So let me play you a recording of one of them, and we've got more of those. If you'd like to hear that, that has a tremendous amount of impact, and you can really watch the faces in the room shift and watch the attitudes in the room shift towards the importance of usability to do that. So the next recommendation is prototype something. Now, if you're going to be doing remote usability testing, you might want to use something with a little bit more finish to it, but there are a lot of tools out there. And so even though a picture is worth 1,000 words, and those, believe me, I made a handsome living using Visio and a lot of static screens, but when I started doing mobile work, you really have to get beyond thinking about a screen and another screen. You really need to think about fluid movement. You need to think about sets of things. You need to think about interaction and moving through those screens and those transitions. There's a whole nother language of understanding that people get from these apps based on the transitions that you built in. Now, if you haven't done this, the closest thing I could think of is PowerPoint or Keynote, where you've got transitions between slides or builds within slides that are designed to add a level of emphasis or create sort of a selective disclosure of elements based on what the tasks are. There are lots of tools out there for this, and although I don't do this, there's really no reason why, if you have the skills, you couldn't go on into production. I'm working and demonstrating with that. I'm working on a project right now that we're really not making an effort to go into rounds and rounds of comp revisions. We're simply going to build these things out, demo them, and make our adjustments from there. We've got a couple of areas identified too where we're going to do some testing. We're going to get some user feedback on these things. So anything you can do to not just demonstrate screens, although you may start that way, at some point you're going to have to show how they string together and begin thinking about the language of transitions and the difference between something sliding in or something appearing, or once it appears, does it have a little bounce to it when it lands? As I said, lots of tools available. I've got some of them listed back here. Your choice is going to depend on a lot of factors. You're not going to use the same tool all the time. So cost is one thing. It's one thing to use a demo. It's something else entirely to pay for it, to get your boss to pay for it. Your client's level of understanding. Some of them may just get it while it's still in the abstract, but some of them may not be able to wrap their brains around it at all, and you wind up having to put a little bit more presentation value into your demos, which of course takes time. But that may be the thing that you have to do in order for your stakeholders to get it. And some of them have a little more or less of a learning curve, and you guys are banging away, so your time is valuable too. So you've got to take that into consideration. But if you can explain a sequence of actions rather than trying to explain connective tissue between states, your argument, and you can demonstrate that instead, your arguments are going to be a whole lot easier to keep focused. So the last thing I'd say is choose these things carefully. Just for the reasons that I was saying before, you can combine them. You can use them one at a time. It all sort of depends on what your environment. The key to what we do is assessment. And no matter UX, no matter how you're wearing it, and no matter where you're applying it, that's really what's at the core of really demonstrating excellence in this space. Being able to assess the capabilities of the team you're on, assess the people who are going to use this thing in the end, get a good understanding of what they want and what they need, and those are two different things. Help drive the conversation forward to focus. You know, use the tool that makes the most sense at the time. So what I'm offering here are lots of different things that you can put in your toolbox. And the more you have to draw upon, that way the more you have to draw upon when the time comes. So UX is also a game of confidence. Confidence in yourself to sell it credibly. Confidence gained so that others will trust in you and believe in the outcome enough to protect it. As I said earlier, design and quality need protection, because while time and money create pain right now, quality creates pain too, or a lack thereof. The only problem is it seems that horizon seems to be a little further down the road than the pain that comes from time and money. So the only way that you're going to be able to really protect that quality is to gain the trust of the people who are the ones making the decisions between where effort's going to go. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself out on that curve, like I said. While you sit there and watch a project hurtle towards someone which you think is a pretty perceivable outcome. If you're lucky, it's mediocre. If you're not lucky, it's a disaster. And these things won't work every time. You're not going to win everybody over every time, but you do have to stay at it and keep doing the things, keep looking for things that are going to capture people's attention and capture their imagination. The more that happens, the more they're going to look to you for that kind of thing, and that's how trust gets built. So I want to leave you with this quote. When I made that trip to Cupertino, this was given to me by one of the evangelists at Apple. And essentially what it's saying is something I mentioned a little bit at the beginning. Your device, whether it's an iPad, a phone, an Android phone, a really good app, the device becomes the app. It stops being your Samsung Galaxy. It stops being your iPhone. It starts to become whatever that app is. And the quote here is, if that's not magic, I don't know what it is. There's a lot of talk about magic in this space, making magic happen. Now, we understand what all is going on underneath it, but the people who are using these apps are just looking to be surprised. They want to be wowed, and they'll call it magic in the absence of anything else. And I think what I've enjoyed most about working in the mobile space is that I get a whole lot more opportunity to create magic than I did before. So, as I said before, I think the story is one that has a shelf life and hopefully is coming to the end of it. Hopefully everybody on this call has had a chance to work in mobile apps before or is going to see that chance soon. I'm fairly certain if you haven't, you will. The demand for it is coming up in just about every environment that has anything going on digitally. And hopefully I've given you a few things here that will give you some waypoints as you get in there to start looking for some things that are different, not just assuming that what you did for the web will work in a mobile space. Because it is truly new media, after all. The App Store was established just less than 6 years ago. And so who knows what devices we're going to be using, what we're going to be called upon to design for. There's so much interest in wearables. And anybody who did like I did, read William Gibson or any of those guys, you know, it's going from not just wearables to implantables. And who knows what we're going to be looking at. But the thing that's true is all these things are going to be generating experiences. Somebody has to be aware enough of what those experiences can be, that the need for what we do, it's going to be our job to observe and evaluate, solve problems, and extend the limits that these things present. So I've got a couple of books here, or a few books here that I would point you to if you're interested in some of the reading. Tapworthy is I think probably the chief piece of literature out there for iPhone design. Mobile First is a great short work that Luca Polansky did, but it's a concept that's important. And I think everybody needs to understand that if they're going to be working around in this space. Some more recent publications, Mobile Frontier by Rachel Hinman on Rosenfeld Media. The mobile book is a combination of articles that were done for Smash Magazine. And simple book in and of itself. It's got amazing information that applies not just to web design, but also applies to mobile as well. Some more specific work I mentioned that gets down into the details, mobile design and development. So, as I mentioned, there's a lot of appendices in this book, or in this deck, and it'll be published, and you'll be able to look at all that, as well as the mobile heuristics and the understanding of the worksheet that you might do associated with that. Links out to websites, links to different resources that are out there. So, if you are, just getting your feet wet in this area, hopefully this will give you a little bit of ammunition to kind of go out and point you in the right direction. So I appreciate y'all spending the time right in the middle of the afternoon on a Monday to come and listen. And now looks like we're doing pretty good. So we've got about 15 minutes, I think, for questions.
Any questions out there? I'll start off with one I have about usability, Adam. And one of them is that it sounds like to me that what you need is more quick and dirty or discount type usability methods rather than formal lab. And would that be a fair assessment when you're going into the mobile space?
Yeah, I think if you really are doing these smaller, I'll refer to them sometimes toolboxes. These smaller apps, there just sometimes isn't the time to set up a testing cycle like you might for a large enterprise app. Now, having said that, one of the areas that is just beginning to get more attention is this notion of business applications, enterprise level applications. These things are having to do some pretty complex tasks. So imagine somebody in an engineering environment, or maybe they're in sales, out trying to talk to their distributors or talk to producers or other engineers, using modeling tools to demonstrate a layout or demonstrate a configuration of some sort. These things are going to be pretty complex, and so the testing that you're going to want to do might be a little bit more toward the traditional testing that we've gotten used to in the large apps. And so while I think when you're out there doing the odd game or two, or you're doing small apps to do some simple things, particularly where those apps are, where there are a lot of competitors and you're trying to introduce some new functionality, quick and dirty is probably the best way to go. But I do see a shift as more enterprise work is being done towards a need for more formal usability.
Okay.
I have some questions that were posted to me. Let's see. How did you get the experience to make the transition from desktop usability testing to app and mobile?
Well, like I said, it wasn't something I looked for. I had been with, I was the UX director at Travelocity when I left there, and I'd been there for almost 9 years. So it was kind of all web at the time. We had just begun to do a little bit of mobile work, but by that time, my involvement was the fact that I had somebody assigned to it. I had a personal interest in it, and so I did a lot of reading, even though I wasn't really getting a chance to put any of it to use, and so that's why I put these books out there. So even if you're not getting a chance to do this stuff practically, go read the work that's out there. There's been a lot of great thinking and a lot of great observations And I think the thing you'll see right away is just how things are different. And it wasn't necessarily difficult to see, you know, just from assessing what I could from use and these differences of in terms of the way that people look at and understand and appreciate the devices and the apps they use, that by necessity the usability testing might need to be a little different, but moreover, it needed to be included. I've seen it so many times on large apps and large companies where, you know, oh, we don't have time for usability, we don't have time for the testing. We're going to go ahead and do it this way. It's one of the first things that we have to notice.
Okay, so what are Adam's thoughts about desktop software with mobile space connectivity?
Responses, you can incorporate that into development, but as I said, there's almost no buffer between getting something launched and getting the feedback on it. It's going to happen right away, and you need to be able to respond to it. You can't just if the concerns fall on deaf ears, then they're simply going to drop your app. And so there's some kind of built-in urgency to it there. But I learned it. It was all on the job training. I wasn't really looking for this job. It came to me.
This person wants to know any resources for accessibility plus usability.
Accessibility is kind of an interesting topic, and I would recommend. And I don't know if I have it in my deck, but I should. While there is not an equivalent for mobile like there is for web design, you know, we have standards, WCAG2 and WCAG3 standards. Usually depends on whether you're doing government work or if you're doing work for clients in other countries. You have to meet an accessibility standard in web design. There have been some things that have been written up that are a good equivalent, and I can fully imagine that there will come a time when the legislation arrives that says, you know, if you're developing on a certain level, you have to build in certain accessibility requirements. So there isn't necessarily an endpoint out there, but I hope it's in my list, and if it's not, I will follow up with that resource. Now that said, Apple has really done a pretty good job of trying to bake in good accessibility. It really is part of how they've operated things. And so if you used a tablet or you used an iPhone, there are accessibility settings that you can put in there for zooming in, zooming out, for speech, for reading the screens, and things along those lines. There's a lot more that can be done, but what has been done has met with the approval of the National Federation of Blind, who are really the biggest sticklers, at least as far as site accessibility. Now, there are some good resources out there on hearing accessibility, and I would point to another colleague of mine named Svetlana Kuznetsova, who is deaf herself and has made the rounds of a number of conferences talking about the kinds of accommodations that you need to make for the deaf. I don't know if she's zeroed in on mobile yet, but I'll bet you if she hasn't done a presentation, she's been thinking about it already. So I would point you in those two directions.
And I've got a couple more questions here from people, but I want everyone to know, and you included, that we can continue this conversation in the comments section on the page on the UX Connect website. So if people have other questions, or if you wanted to post the resources that you're not coming up with right now, you can do it that way. Let's see, older organizations seem to be slow-moving, adopting mobile-first path because of cost, large installation base, et cetera. Do you have any anecdotes or experience that you can share moving through that?
Yeah. Gosh, I hate to put this out there as sort of the end solution, but a lot of times you're going to have to sort of ride that train into the wall. before anybody is going to look to see that, and hopefully you don't take the blame for it, but before anybody's going to look to see that they really are dealing with something different. Sometimes you have to ride this expectation that a larger organization has, that they can just take what they have and stick it in a phone or stick it in a tablet and it'll work just fine. As I said, the feedback is going to be immediate.
How important is it to design for feature phones as well as for smartphones for web applications?
So you could do a heuristic evaluation of what you're working on, or you could pull from some other resources to say, you know what, we shouldn't necessarily put everything we have in the phone, but here's something that really suits the phone environment, and we should start with that. That's one recommendation. I had a circumstance where we had somebody who really was fighting against reorienting the screen when you turned it. And they were being kind of horsey about it, and they were being kind of horsey about it with the guy that I had assigned to the project. He sort of took a public beating over it. And I knew these guys had read Josh Clark's book, Tapworthy. And so what I did is I just emailed Josh and said, hey, can you settle a bet for me? Which he did, and he gave me a good answer. And I printed that email up, and I gave it to my guy, who went back into the meeting and said, no, I hate to beat a dead horse with you. You guys really sure about screen reorientation thing? Oh, yeah. You think Josh Clark would agree with that? You know, you've all read his book. And they said, oh, absolutely. And then my guy slid the email across the table and said, well, here's what Doc does say about it. So that's kind of a cruel and unusual way to make an influence on your project, but I think that's one anecdote I can share. It's a little mean-spirited, but I think if my guy hadn't been beat up publicly, I wouldn't have felt so strongly about it. But yeah, as I said, install base, I think, probably has as much to do with it as anything. We've spent all this money building a website, right? Why do we need to rethink everything for the phone? Let's just put it in the phone. Sometimes you're going to have to go ahead and do that.
There are a couple questions about offline connectivity. What are your thoughts on the availability of an app to work when there's no online connection available?
Did you lose me?
I can hear you.
Okay.
Yeah, why don't you repeat that question?
Okay. What are your thoughts on offline connectivity, the availability of an app to work when no online connection is available?
Well, I'll give you the stock answer for that one. It depends. There's certainly, I've seen circumstances where you have online capability and you would download some information or a piece of data to save and use later. But again, this sort of goes against the idea that you've got this device that can read and tell and understand so many things about the world around it. Plus, devices have limits as far as the amount of memory that they have and the amount of stuff they can download. When you're reaching into deep databases, you really just kind of need to be able to pull those up in pieces, otherwise you'll choke your device. So that's something that you want to work out with your developers and see, depending on what kind of data a client or your stakeholders want to have available. Seeing what the devices can stand that circumstance before you make the determination to download a lot of it. I know that in the coming year, big data is going to push a lot of information out there, and I think there's going to be a focus on devices to be able to accommodate more of it at one time. But until then, I think it's going to be a matter of being selective about what you pull into your apps.
Okay. One last question. What methods have you used to determine context of use for an app?
Well, part of it is just getting out there. This is where the guerrilla user testing comes in. You can be a little bit of an anthropologist on your own. Just go out in places. I gave you, a list of 5 places where people most often use their devices. Now, some of those, to be able to observe people doing that, would be a little invasive, so want to be careful. But get out in the places where you see people using that. Go to the airport. Go to go to the coffee shop. Go hang around at student union. walk up and down the hallways at a conference or something like that, and you can and take a close look at the way people are using their devices, not just what apps are they using, but what's their posture, what's their physical position as they use them. Don't be afraid. In some cases, if it makes sense, to go up and ask them. You know, hey, what you doing? I'm doing some user research here on use. Would you mind telling me what app you're using? When do you use it the most? I noticed that you're laying out here on the floor. Is this normally how you sit when you're using it? Get out in the field. The only way you're really going to understand these things, rather than waiting for reports, is to get out and observe on your own. Did I lose you?
Yeah, that's it.
Okay.
Yeah, want to really thank you, Adam. That was a great talk and stimulated some good questions. And so thank you, everybody, for participating. And be sure to go to the website if you have further thoughts. That's uxconnect.wordpress.com, and you can add comments there and start a discussion.
Sure, and my Twitter handle is at the beginning of the deck, and then the deck will be available, is AdamDIA, all one word. So if you want to see noise about it, good or bad, go right ahead.
Okay, great. And on September 15th, we'll have Stacy Thurla, and thank you again, Adam.
You bet, thanks.
Okay, see ya.